The orphanage was starving for Thanksgiving. Then a stranger's wagon rolled in. Before we kick off this adventure, don't forget to hit like on the video, and let us know in the comments where you're watching from. Wyoming Territory, 1889. Frostfall Basin. The cold didn't care who you were. It cut through mercy and sin just the same. And as dawn bled over Frostfall Basin, Ilara felt that familiar sting crawl beneath her coat, whispering that something was wrong out here. She stepped into the open frost, boots cracking through the thin ice crust. The world was quiet in that sharp, breath-holding way the basin sometimes had. Silence stretching. Sky pale as bone. Frost glittering across the abandoned wagon ahead like it had been dusted with ground glass. Behind her, the two children clung to each other, half hidden by her skirt. She kept a hand behind her, steady and reassuring, even though her pulse was climbing fast. A lone wolf howl rolled from Cinder Ridge, far, but not far enough to ignore. Then came the sound that made her freeze, a single rifle crack, distant, faint, but real. She held her breath. Another echo didn't follow. A warning, she thought, or something worse. She stepped forward anyway, moving slow across the frost. The morning light broke over the basin in thin gold strips, sliding across the overturned crates and the wagon's splintered wheel. The horses were gone. The reins dragged in the snow like something had ripped them loose. She pulled the children a little closer behind her. Mercy doesn't come unguarded in the basin, unless there's a catch. Her breath showed in thin white clouds as she approached the wagon. The boards carried marks, not from weather, but from struggle. A boot scrape here. A blood smear, already darkening, there. The wind shifted, carrying the cold scent of pine and something sharper beneath it. The girl whispered, "Is someone hurt?" Ilara shook her head gently. "Stay right behind me." She reached the wagon and rested a hand on the side, letting the chill bite her palm. The canvas flap was half torn open, flapping weakly with each rise of wind. Inside, the shadows pooled deep, hiding whatever waited. She listened. Nothing. The basin held its breath. With a slow exhale, she lifted the flap. Instead of bodies, instead of raiders or dying travelers, she found only a single parcel sitting in the middle of the wagon bed. Wrapped in deep red cloth, tied in a precise knot. No dust on it. No frost. Placed there. Deliberate. The boy asked softly, "Why'd someone leave that?" Ilara didn't answer. Her eyes swept the tree line instead, scanning for movement. Every instinct told her this was bait. Someone watching. Someone waiting to see who touched the parcel next. The echo of that rifle shot lingered in her thoughts, circling like a hawk. Still, she climbed inside the wagon, her hands brushing the cold boards. The air inside was warmer, faintly scented with cedar, wrong for a supply cart, wrong for this place. Her fingers hovered over the parcel. The cloth was clean. No blood. No dirt. Whoever left it had done so moments before the frost settled, or had sheltered it in their coat until the very last second. She didn't unwrap it. Not yet. Instead, she cupped it gently and stepped back out into the open light. The girl tugged at her sleeve. "Ilara, is someone coming back for it?" Ilara studied the horizon, the empty scar of wagon tracks, the timberline where the crack of the rifle had come from, the drifting mist curling between the pines like someone breathing slow and quiet. "I don't know," she said. But the truth pressed harder inside her chest. Someone always comes back for something this carefully left behind. The wind picked up again, carrying frost through the air in slow spirals. The children shivered. Ilara tucked the parcel into her coat, not out of trust, but out of the knowledge that leaving it here might draw danger faster. She turned toward the basin path, keeping her back to the wagon, her eyes never leaving the timberline. "Stay close," she said. "Don't look back." They moved as the sun climbed higher, thin light following them like a question they could not yet answer. Every crunch of frost beneath her boots felt too loud. Every rustle in the pines felt too intentional. Somewhere behind them, far off but not nearly far enough, another howl drifted through the ridges, and this one did not sound alone. Ilara tightened her grip on the strange parcel, pulse rising like a drum in her ribs. Whatever had left this behind wasn't done with them yet. Rumor has claws, and in Frostfall Basin they tear a man open long before a rifle does. They came soft at first, a whisper at the mercantile, and then they spread like smoke, staining faces and every quiet corner. Jonah sat on the stoop with his hat low and the sun cutting angles across his jaw. He had the look of someone who'd learned to make peace with the long, slow ache of things. A steam of tobacco curled from his mouth while his hands folded into each other like a prayer gone practical. Children darted past, laughter brittle in the cold air. He watched them, not unkindly, as if measuring how much innocence the basin still let breathe. By the post, a toy lay half buried in dust, a small wooden horse, paint chipped, mane scored by too many little fingers. It rolled when a gust hit and stopped against Jonah's boot. The sight of it made his mouth tighten. He picked it up with the same care he'd give a live thing and balanced it on his knee like a talisman. The horse was more honest than the talk of men. It did not hide its scars. They spoke Cole's name sideways, with a shiver in their voices. Not everyone dared say it aloud. A woman paused in the mercantile doorway, shawl tight around her throat, and yanked her daughter inside as Jonah looked on. "Don't speak his name on a cold day. The basin hears it," she whispered, and the child nodded like she'd been taught to keep both ears and eyes small. An old man, fingers swollen with hard winters, muttered as he stacked sacks of feed. "Folks who go up that ridge don't always come back with their peace." He did not look up. No one did. Cole Maddox had a way of living like a shadow that kept its edges sharp. The whispers made him larger than life and smaller in truth, folded into legend by fear. Jonah's fingers found the burn on his wrist without thinking, a long, pale line that ran under the soot. He rubbed it with a thumb that trembled only a little, the motion passing almost unnoticed. "Out here." "They often do," he said, voice low, and his thumb stayed on the scar. The words were a stone dropped into a well. The ripple spread. When Jonah spoke, people listened. He didn't add where he'd seen the flame that left that mark. The basin kept some memories to itself. Ilara moved through the market like someone carrying a private light. The parcel from the wagon had been tucked inside her coat. She kept her hand near it the way you keep a lantern near a hand in a dark room. The wooden horse caught her eye and she stopped, kneeling as if to tie a shoelace, though she merely straightened it in her palm. She said nothing, but the gesture tethered her to a world where small things mattered, a child's laugh, a cracked toy, a favor owed. A boy from the saloon swaggered by, trying to look braver than his boots allowed. He spat and said Cole's name loud enough for the dog in the alley to tilt its head. Head snapped toward him. The sound died in the dust. "You don't call the ridge," someone hissed from under a cap. The boy's bravado thinned like smoke. Jonah slipped the wooden horse into his breast pocket, close to that scar that felt like a map of an older mistake. The toy against his chest made the scar feel less like a secret and more like a warning. He straightened, the sun throwing his shadow long across the boardwalk, and for a moment his eyes were two flint chips, hard and ready. Ilara watched him, noting the way he rubbed the wrist when he said the words. The motion landed like a camera cut, subtle, telling. He had been burned by something that taught him not to shout at fires. She kept her hand where the parcel warmed under her coat, its shape barely shifting with her breath. Whispers curled into speculation and then into plans. Someone suggested going up the ridge at dusk. Another voice, quieter, said better we don't. The mercantile's bell chimed and the mood inside shifted like a horse sensing thunder. Jonah's voice cut through the small crowd, the words measured. "If you're thinking of climbing up there for a name, don't. The basin keeps its own counsel." He let the silence press after him. The wooden horse thumped softly against his ribs as he walked away, a tiny, private drumbeat. Outside, the wind brought a hint of smoke from the timberline, not much, just a whisper. Ilara felt it like an answering thought, a small promise or a threat she couldn't yet read. She folded the children closer and turned toward the path that led up and out, toward the ridge everyone spoke of in low, tidy fear. Behind them, the market resumed its gentle murmur, but the name had taken root. Cole Maddox waited somewhere beyond sight, wrapped in rumor and shadow. The basin listened, and someone, somewhere, had already begun to make a choice. The house remembered fire before the people who lived in it did, its bones blackened and patient, like a thing that had learned to breathe in the ash. Ilara pushed through the sagging porch and the smell hit her first, old smoke, dry sawdust, and the faint, sweet tang of something that used to be cedar. Light from a thin winter sun slanted through broken shutters, striping the floor with long, sawed lines. Sawdust lay in soft drifts, like snow for the hands that worked here once. Each grain told of measured cuts and quieter patience. The room felt half-built and half-buried, as if someone had tried to hammer memory back into place and then given up. Cole stood just inside the doorway. He did not look at Alara at first. His shoulders were a wall of uneven lines, his hat cupped in both hands like a thing that could catch a falling idea. When she crossed the threshold, his gaze flicked to the burned wing of the house, a black, crumpled corner where a staircase had once climbed. For a single heartbeat he stilled. The movement was almost invisible, a hitch in the frame of him, as if the house had whispered a name he could not answer. His jaw tightened. He shut the door harder than needed, its clap ringing like a verdict. The sound was small and sharp. The house seemed to flinch with him, settling into silence after the strike. Alara kept her parcel tucked against her chest. The children stood close behind her, their faces bright with the strange courage only the young carry into ruined rooms. She walked past a low workbench where a chisel lay half-buried in sawdust, its handle nicked the way old promises are. The tool's edge caught the light like a pale eye. Sawdust dusted her boots as she moved. It clung to the hem of her skirt, to the calluses of her palms, as if the house itself wanted to hold a memory of her. The smell made Jonah's warning from the market rise in her throat. The ridge keeps its counsel, and yet the room felt hollow in a way that invited conversation. Ash and wood and the long quiet between them. That was where truths usually waited. Cole watched her without speaking. He kept his hands at his sides, fingers curled like someone convoking restraint. When he finally stepped forward, he made no sound, his bootfalls muted against the sawdust. There was a storm in the outside sky, low and brotherly to the sound of distant thunder, and it moved toward the basin slow as a thought. Inside, the house collected its breath and held it. "You shouldn't have come here," Cole said, voice coarse with something like apology and opinion mixed. He didn't ask the parcel's origin. He didn't ask about tracks. He watched Alara instead, measuring the warmth of her, the way the children huddled. Alara's answer was a plain thing. "We had to know if someone was left." He did not argue. He nodded once, as if accepting something inevitable. His eyes kept drifting to that burned wing, catching on the ruined staircase as if expecting it to move. He rubbed the side of his face, a motion that started in the jaw and ended low against his collar. The ache in him was a map with no name. A loose board creaked and Alara looked down. The wood gave way beneath a thin scatter of sawdust, and for a moment the house seemed ready to cough up its old secrets. Outside, wind pressed against the shutters like a hand testing patience. The sound rose and fell with the promise of weather. The storm felt less like a thing of rain and more like a mirror, a weathered drum that kept time with the trouble gathered in men's chests. Jonah stepped up beside the doorframe, his shadow long and a little ragged. He moved as if part of the house already, as if some of his own history had been nailed into these beams long ago. When he crossed the doorway, his hand brushed the wooden horse tucked in his pocket, and the movement was small but faithful. He looked at Cole, then at Alara, and his face folded into the kind of caution that makes good people into careful ones. "There's saw marks on the banister yet," Jonah said, nodding toward the ruined wing. His voice was quiet, tuned to keep the children from shivering. "Someone tried to fix this after the fire. Tried to pretend it didn't happen." Cole's fingers flexed. He glanced once more at the burned stair and then at the children, at the way their small chests rose and fell. He swallowed something that could have been a name and closed his mouth like a fist. The storm pulled nearer, and the first cold breath of wind found its way through a crack in the wall. It sounded like distant horse hooves, steady and inevitable. Outside, the basin's light dimmed as if someone had let a curtain fall. Cole moved to the firebox and struck a match with care, the tiny flare cutting a hole in the dim. For a second, the room held its shape in that small light. Ash, sawdust, the scarred wing, and the people who tried to stand inside the remnants. He set the kettle on and did not sit. Instead, he kept his back to the burned stair, as if his posture could keep a memory locked in place. Alara watched him with a kind of quiet appraisal. The house smelled of half-measures and attempts. The sawdust on the floor wrote a line between the past and what might be remade. Outside, thunder rolled like a far-off judgment. Cole closed his eyes for a breath, then opened them, the line of his jaw cutting like a promise. "I'll keep you until the sky settles," he said. Not a vow, not a permission, only the outline of an intention. Ilara folded her hands over the parcel, feeling its warmth like something that belonged to a future they could not yet name. The children drew closer, believing in shelter because shelter was what they had been taught to seek. The kettle sang its small tin song as the wind rose. In the burned wing, shadows held a patience all their own. The house listened, and somewhere inside Cole, a quiet beat answered, a memory that would not be left to sleep. He carried a wrong kind of weight, the sort that makes a house answer when you move. When Cole finally spoke of that night, the words came out like broken coal, hot and jagged. They were gathered close to the hearth, the kettle now quiet and the room holding its small, strained warmth. The children had been put to the far corner on an old quilt, their breaths even and small. Jonah stood near the doorway, shadowed, watchful. Ilara sat where the light fell, the parcel under her coat as if it might grow roots there. The burned wing of the house kept its silence like a wounded thing. Cole's hands were empty but not idle. He found the rim of the charred cradle and rested his palm there, fingers spreading across soot that never came clean. The powder marked his skin like a confession. He did not notice at first. The motion was a map to something deeper, a habit worn into the hollow of him. "Smoke," he said, and the word cracked as if it were breaking on his teeth. His voice faltered on it, catching like a snagged rope. The room leaned in without meaning to. He closed his eyes and the memory moved through him like a current. There was a taste of iron and cordite he could still not name without turning. He reached into a pocket and pulled out a scrap of cloth, faded linen, frayed where hands had clasped it too often. 2 letters had been stitched into the corner in careful thread. M.A. The initials curved in a hand both steady and loving. It smelled faintly of lavender and old sun. "My," he started, and stopped as if the name might blow out a window. He laid the cloth on the cradle's rim, fingers lingering where the soot met fabric. His thumb brushed the letter, and for a moment the 2 textures, soot and thread, were a small, terrible geography under his skin. "We were careless," he said finally, voice smaller than the room. The word hung like ash. Ilara's face had a patience that is never easy. She kept her gaze calm and steady. The children watched the cloth without understanding the weight of its stitches. Jonah's hand tightened around the wooden horse in his pocket, knuckles whitening. Cole breathed in again, the air thin and full of the house's memory. The way he said smoke made the syllable catch and crumble. It was the sound of a man naming the thing he couldn't bury. He put his other hand to the cradle, and soot smudged his knuckle. The mark showed up like a truth. He told it small at first, a lantern overturned, a night that moved quicker than caution, a curtain that leaned too close to flame. Each detail came out measured, not to excuse but to mark the path he'd walked. He paused between sentences, as if each breath might be the last honest thing he could give. "She was humming," he said, voice raw, and the room shifted as if a weight had slid. "She hummed that lullaby and I thought I'd fix the latch before I left. Thought I could do one thing and come back." His fingers trembled, finding the cradle's rim again, rubbing soot into the cloth like a man trying to rub a shadow off his hands. Jonah spoke then, slow and spare. "You can't put a house back whole by telling it you're sorry." The line landed like a plank set into place. There was no malice in it, only the blunt edge of truth. Cole's eyes flashed open, and for a blink the storm outside seemed to answer, a low roll that threaded through the boards. He swallowed hard. "I tried," he said, and the room could hear how small that went against what had been lost. A hush settled. The children's breathing kept time with the kettle's faint tick. Ilara's hand found the parcel beneath her coat and did not move. The initials on the cloth seemed to watch the hearth, patient and accused at once. Then, a shadow passed across the shutter. It was a motion too deliberate for a bird or stray scare. Heads turned. For a breath the world outside held like a frozen film. Ilara moved before anyone asked. She crossed to the window and peered down. Snow lay thin and angry at the foot of the house, but there were marks pressed into it. One boot print, deep and deliberate, the kind made by a man who meant to stand and wait. Beside the print a pine twig lay fractured, its splinters pinning the snow like a small, stubborn flag. Someone stood there long enough to watch, she said, and the air tightened. Cole's hand left the cradle and hovered in the dim, soot dusting his fingertips. He closed his mouth like a man who'd swallowed ash. The boots outside might be a passerby, might be nothing, or they might be a careful footprint left by someone who kept to the edge of danger. Jonah stepped forward, the wooden horse tapping his palm like a metronome. "We keep eyes tonight," he said, plain and final. The words folded around the room and stayed. Cole nodded once, slow and terrible in its simplicity. He wrapped his fingers around the scrap of cloth, careful as a man holding a lit coal. His lips moved over the initials like a prayer that was also an apology. The wind outside rose. The shadow had gone, but the print and broken twig remained, talking in the language of weather and patience. Inside, soot dusted the hands of the living like an honest tally. Cole looked toward the burned wing as if listening for an answer it could not give. His jaw set, resolve and ruin braided together. "We'll watch," he said, and the words were both a promise and a warning. He had no promise left that didn't come with a cost, and the basin was the kind of place that kept its tab. Cole felt the weight of it in his hands, in the way his shoulders tightened when a man in fine boots spoke his name. Whitlow stood under the low eave of the mercantile like a question dressed in linen. His eyes were sharp as a hawk's and twice as cold. He smiled the way men do when they mean to cut a bargain and a throat at once. Behind him, two clerks pretended to sweep while listening. The children clustered near Alara, their small faces pale with whatever courage they could borrow from her. "You took in strangers," Whitlow said, voice smooth and slow. "Or you let a rumor do your kindness for you, Maddox. Either way, it puts you where I like to look." Cole stepped forward so his bare boots lined up with Whitlow's polished ones. The wind moved through the boardwalk like a sentinel passing judgment. Sawdust from the house rode his jacket in faint flakes. The smell of burned pine still clung to him like memory. "You don't speak to my house like that," Cole said. His voice was calm, but the basin of it carried a promise. People turned their heads. Even the dogs quieted. Whitlow's smile sharpened. "Oppose me, Maddox, and I'll put your ranch under federal review. Your land deeds aren't as solid as you think." He let the words hang like iron weights. "See that I mean it. I've men who can make a paper trail look like truth." Silence leaned in, heavy and tactile. Jonah's hand closed around the wooden horse in his pocket until his knuckles whitened. Ilara's fingers tightened on the parcel beneath her coat. The children looked too small for the stakes pressed against the adults like a storm. Cole felt the words like a blow. The ranch was everything he had built against wind and drought and the slow erosion of time. It was land and sweat and the ghosts of men who'd trusted him with fences and herds. Whitlow naming it took the place of a threat and a tally both. Protect the children, he thought, and the thought landed in him like a splinter. Protect the ranch, and the children would go. The choice spread in his chest like a map with two roads and a cliff between them. "You can take my deeds," Cole said quietly. "You can take every legal scrap you can wring from a judge. But you don't take those children." Whitlow laughed, a sound that tasted like coin. "You're sentimental, Maddox. Sentiment won't keep a mortgage collector at bay." Cole's jaw worked. He glanced at the burned wing of his house, the cradle's rim where soot had left its signature. He felt the memory of smoke catch his throat like a hand. His fingers found the scar along his wrist and rubbed it as if the motion could steady him. Jonah watched him, a long steady look that said two men could stand a wind or fall to it together. "If you touch them," Cole said, and his voice carried now like a made thing, "you'll find every fence, every man I know, and then some. But I won't barter children for paper." Whitlow stepped closer, so close his breath felt like a challenge. "You make enemies of men with longer ledgers than your heart. You know what that costs." Cole's hand went to the cradle's cloth inside his coat, the initials M.A. pressed into the linen like an accusation and a plea. He thought of the soot on his fingers, of the way he'd learned to carry the small and break the big, of promises that were more than deeds. The children were more than mercy, they were a measure of who he was. "I chose once before," he said, voice low as gravel. I won't choose wrong again. He felt the choice settle in him like planks set into mud. It made his shoulders square, made his face a map of lines that didn't tremble. He braced as if for a storm. Whitlow's smile thinned into a line. He lifted a hand, slow as a man counting coins. Then you'll lose a lot you hold dear, Cole. I'll see the ranch questioned. I'll see men sent to make trouble. You'll be left with nothing but the debt of a choice. Cole met him eye to eye. The basin seemed to hold its breath. The horses paused. The bell at the mercantile stilled. Jonah's fingers tapped the wooden horse in a small, steady rhythm like a heartbeat. Keep what you can't take, Cole said. But you leave those children alone. Whitlow's boots scraped on the boardwalk. He tipped his hat as if closing an account. We'll see how long you can keep that faith, he said, and turned away, the threat settling over the town like dust. When he was gone, the murmur in the crowd returned in a soft wave of speculation and fear. Cole lowered his head for a single moment, the weight of the choice making his spine heavy. Then he straightened. He looked at the children as if mapping the future across their small faces. We brace for what comes, he said to Jonah and Ilara. His voice was even, but there was a steel under it now. He drew breath and let the cold air hit him like a challenge. Outside, clouds gathered as if called by the same decision. The ranch might tremble under Whitlow's reach, deeds could fray, and men could whisper. But Cole had set a line. He had chosen the small lives over the paper that held his name. He tightened his grip on the promise like a man who had learned how to carry flame without burning the ones he loved. Tonight, they would watch. Tomorrow, the basin would measure whether courage alone could stand between a man and the things he'd refused to sell. Snowfalls forgive nothing. They only make every footprint louder. Cole stood at the orphanage doorway with flakes settling on his hat, each one a small, cold question. He'd not been inside a place full of children in 5 years. The sound caught him off guard before the light did. Laughter, bright and careless, pealing out of the building like bells. It was a noise he hadn't allowed himself to remember. For a moment his breath trembled in the air and fogged his face. One step forward, one step back, the world measured by the weight of old fear. Inside, the room swam with motion. Boys passed wooden blocks between them. A girl braided yarn. Another set a battered tin cup on a shelf with solemn ceremony. Snowlight fell through the windows in pale stripes, that same light that had once turned the burned lip of his cradle into a map he couldn't read without pain. The orphanage smelled of warm bread and soap and the kind of small human mess that made houses into homes. Jonah stood to one side with his hands folded, face steady like he'd been carved from the same stubborn wood as the building. Ilara's coat was dusted with snow where she'd stood at the door, her hand tucked against the parcel at her chest. She met Cole's eyes and did not let him drown in them. She reached out, an ordinary human gesture, and the moment snapped like a line breaking. Her fingers found his as if guiding him across an invisible river. "Come in," she said, simple as a lantern offered in the dark. He crossed the threshold then, hat in hand, snow falling from its brim like small apologies. The children watched him with the curious bluntness of those who measure worth by how steady one's step is. A little boy nudged another and grinned. A girl with braids held up a painted rock as if it were treasure. Cole felt each small thing strike him like a bell. Near the hearth, a toy lay on a low bench, a wooden horse Jonah had mentioned before, its paint flaked like old promises. It rolled when Cole's boot brushed the floor and came to rest against the newcomer's boot. The sight of it made something in him ache and unknot at the same time. He stooped and set it upright, thumbing at the nick in its mane as if remembering how to be gentle. The room hummed with the soft logic of survival. Boys teaching boys to carve, older ones painting a model cradle in patient strokes. Ruth, a small child with a sunburned nose and big, steady eyes, tugged on Cole's sleeve as if she'd found a seam into the adult world. She stepped forward with something cupped to her small chest. "We made it for you," she announced, the way children hand over truth without a veil. She held out a tiny cradle carved from pine, varnished in a bright, cheerful paint. The older boys had sanded each curve with care. Someone had scratched a small heart into the base. Cole's breath caught. It was only wood and paint, but his fingers trembled as he reached out. He touched the miniature cradle the way a man touches a memory he's almost forgotten how to hold. His hand brushed the smooth wood. The contact was a bridge that spanned something raw inside him. Tears came then, not hidden, rolling down a face that had learned to set its jaw against weather and threat. He looked at Alara with an openness he'd not offered since the days the house burned. The way soot once marked his hands and the cradle once marked his heart. The miniature answered the burned cradle like an echo answering a bell. "You didn't have to," he said, voice small and honest as a child's question. Ruth shrugged. Matter of fact. "You looked lonely." Laughter rose again, soft and true, and Cole felt it settle like a hand on his shoulder. For the first time in years the weight in his chest shifted, not gone, but rearranged so he could breathe around it. He set the little cradle beside the hearth where the light would find it, a new thing planted in the old ash. Outside, snow continued to fall, making the world polite and plain. Inside, a handmade promise sat where soot used to be the only mark. Cole wiped his face on a sleeve and did not pretend the past had been erased. He only let the present be a room big enough to hold both grief and small, stubborn hope. He stayed then, with the children laughing and Ruth's cradle shining in the hearthlight, knowing the choice to stay would have consequences. The snow on his hat melted into the boards, and somewhere beyond the windows the ridge kept its watchful silence.